And welcome back to the Den. We have a couple of guests here today. First off, we have Goodman, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Goodman. I occasionally play tabletop games.
And then, of course, we have Brien. I guess he's technically a co-host, not a guest.
Oh, hey. Thank you for that warm, welcoming introduction, Kyle.
That's what we're here for. So today we are here to talk about Moonbreaker, which is kind of a tabletop war game, but it's actually digital. It is basically a digital version of a true tabletop miniatures. And if you're currently listening to the podcast of this, you may want to check out the YouTube video because it's going to have footage of the game playing and different visuals for it. So, Brien, let's start with you. What is Moonbreaker to you? Kind of your description of it.
Like you were saying, it is a tabletop miniatures skirmish war game, but it's all computerized. It's a video game, which is going to allow you to play against an AI or other players. And then it offloads all of that fiddly at the table measuring and calculating rules and figuring out chance to hit, all of that you might not want to do. Since it's on a computer, the computer will do for you.
Exactly. So to give people a little bit of an idea as to how the game works, if you ever played Duelist, that's what I hear most people compare it to. The old video game Duelist, which is now dead, but being recreated, I think. They're making a new one. So essentially, you kind of pick a roster ahead of time. It's like Malifaux in that sense, where you have 10 guys that you're going to run with your captain, who is your leader unit that starts on the table. But you only start with the captain on the table, and then you summon models in as you go. You slowly get more and more. It's called Cinder in this case, effectively mana. And then each round you can spend that mana to summon in units, to use your special abilities. You also have these ship assists, but those are on timers and don't use Cinder. But they're another ability that you can use periodically. And between those, you're essentially trying to take out the enemy captain. If you're actually familiar with Warcaster, it plays very similar to that, where you're summoning in units in that regard. That being said, unlike Warcaster, once a unit's dead, it's dead. You can't keep resummoning it. So, Goodman, you probably have the least amount of experience. What was your takeaway from it?
Reminded me of the relatively minimally played game Scrolls, but also Duelist. I think the things that stand out immediately is that it gets rid of the hex system. Everything's a lot more flexible, like on a tabletop where you can just move wherever. You're not bound to specific intervals. It also adds this idea of everyone having abilities that you can activate. Now you're having to think about, are you just summoning out all of these units using your mana, or are you actually going to try to use abilities to essentially gain tempo at the cost of this resource? It's also very focused on, you have melee and ranged attacks as opposed to spells or something.
Yeah, one of the things I love about this versus a lot of other games I played that try to mimic the tabletop is that terrain very much is important. And terrain also can body block things out. So you can use the terrain very effectively to manipulate what your opponent can and can't do. And that's something that comes into play, especially for melee models that can't just shoot across the table. Sometimes you can block their lanes, you can choke them out, and they have to just walk around, and it makes their turns a lot less efficient. Playing against people that are more Hearthstone players, and you can tell they don't know how to use terrain because they're doing real. I was like, oh, you just blocked yourself in there, bud.
Well, it definitely created this very high-level tactical awareness of the physical board state. Since all melee is base contact, if you want to melee someone, you have to be touching that model. So using models you're summoning, using the terrain like you're talking about to body block. So you really have to have a conscious awareness of that entire board, which even in Malifaux, which is the only war game I play, the map is important, but it doesn't have nearly that much impact because it's so large. The map's pretty compact to begin with. And then you have big pieces of terrain, and if you make a mistake in your positioning, that's a huge deal. But conversely, you can get yourself massively back in a game you were losing because you found a clever way to plug up a lane or force an enemy down a certain spot. it brings a nice like secondary play element into the game without having to explicitly like make a new mechanic or invent this new idea for a game. They just kind of like created a system where it's important, which is, I think, really cool.
Yeah, and I really love that it introduces concepts that we as like Malifaux players understand, but clearly like the majority of like digital players don't necessarily see some of these concepts as much, such as model spacing. Like you don't want to keep your models next to each other necessarily, because there was a lot of times where you could just hit people with AoE and just destroy them. We as Malifaux players are used to models that blast, and we're aware of that. So it's like, okay, I need to make sure these are so far apart so I'm not getting hit by multiple blasts kind of thing. Whereas like some people just ignore that completely and they just get rocked when they just walked into those things. Also, I love the movement tricks. That's something I really, really love about like Malifaux and games like this. And this game totally has those tricks because you have like the pool grenades and things like that, where you can like yank your own guys into lanes where your opponent was like, oh, you can't hit me from here. And then you yank yourself across the map with a grenade and then shoot them. They're like, oh, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, they're very generous with giving movement abilities to things, which I think is where you want to be with this kind of a game. It just makes a lot of space for creativity and unexpected plays.
Mm-hmm. So the game just came out for the playtest weekend as of this record. They're doing another playtest weekend. I believe it's this upcoming weekend. So it should be going up live, I think, when this is going to be coming out. So it should be this weekend if you're listening right now. And then it's actually going to be officially up on the 29th, so end of the month. And you can play it whenever at that point, as opposed to just the weekends. We highly recommend you check that out because it's a lot of fun. I want this game to be successful. It's basically the thing I've been wanting to play for the longest time. And that's not just because of the game, it's because of the second part of it. This is a miniatures game. You can paint your miniatures in this game. No game has ever done this before. This is the first time I've ever seen anything. And it's not like painting like you would expect most video games to be, where you could like set certain layers to be certain colors. No, it like mimics actual painting. You can do washes, you can do dry brushing, you can change the size of your brush, you can change the opacity. There's a palette and you can actually mix the colors together to get the colors you want. You can do highlighting. It's insane that you can actually basically straight up paint a mini in a digital game.
Yeah, it's a really cool concept. I've never claimed to be like someone who does the hobby side of Malifaux and the minis games, but I know people who are super into it, and listening to them talk at length about all of these techniques and the different ways to create the different effects you want. And from looking at it, I dabbled, 20 minutes with it. It does all of that. Like, that's just really impressive. So it's something that they're very much like designing this game to also appeal to hobbyists. So like, oh, you just want to like digitally paint all of these models and then show them off? Go do it. And everything you could do in like the physical space, you can do it in the digital. And they definitely didn't need to do that. They could have just sold different skins for all of these models for $1 and no one was allowed to paint it. So it really like appeals, I think, to your pure gamers, your pure hobbyists, and that in-between space, which is just like really smart design, but also just really cool.
You can totally put some effort into it. Like, just playing around with it for a little bit, I could definitely feel like it captured the same feeling I had when I'm painting models in real life.
I think it could be a tool to introduce people to painting too, because painting can be a bit involved if you're not familiar with it. Just you have to build the model in some cases. Then it's a lot of paint to buy. You got to buy brushes. You got to buy all these tools to do it. It can be a little daunting. Whereas this, you just load it up and you just go. It can be a good tool to learn how to paint, and then you can take some of the techniques that you're learning from this game and translate it to actual painting. Or this could also just replace painting. Like, some people just are painters for the sake of painting, as we talked about. They're hobbyists. And this is something that you could just do. You don't have to play the game. You could just sit there and paint these different models. I don't know how they're going to handle skins and painting, if there's going to be a marketplace where you can sell these, or if there's a way to distribute your paint jobs that you do or not. We think that'd be really cool if they introduce that, because There's some people that I'm pretty sure just spent the weekend painting in this game for the playtest, and there's some very cool like OSL like painting jobs that people did in the game, and it's like some of them are pretty impressive looking, clearly skilled painters that are then translating their skills to this digital space. So I think if you're into that sort of thing, you should definitely check the game out just for that alone. Now, this is a brand new game, so I expect to see a lot of changes in the upcoming weeks and some adjustments, quality of life things. So let's just take a second and talk about things that we would like to see change in this game or stuff maybe we would look forward to seeing change in this game. So starting with you, Brien, what's something you'd really look forward to seeing that's not in the game currently?
I think a little bit more playstyle variance. Obviously, this is early access beta mode with like a soft launch at the end of the month. You have like 3 captains, which kind of can get reduced down to the melee guy, the gun guy, and then the mana ramp lady. And a little more interplay between those 3 columns, I think, would be like a really good idea. Someone who they have a melee attack, and once they use the melee, it switches to range, and then it cycles, a series of different abilities. So it's a fusion of both, I think, would provide variance in the game style, because as is, it's just, are you melee or are you guns?
What about you, Goodman? Is there anything you'd like to see added?
I don't know. I only was able to play it a limited number of times, so I feel like I'm still exploring how everything plays out. If anything, it seemed like there weren't a lot of compelling reasons to go into melee, so a little bit of help there, maybe. But overall, I think it's a pretty solid skeleton.
Mm-hmm. I think I would like to see, and this kind of leans into what Brien was saying, I think it'd be cool to see objectives versus just kill the captain. And I think that would introduce a little variance in play style. You could start with the very simple ones with like hold a point or hold multiple points, put like 3 on the table or whatever. And each round that you hold one, you get like points towards a total. Alternatively, you could do capture the flag. That's a pretty common one. You could do like push the thing, whatever it is. There's been plenty of scenarios in games where you do that sort of thing. I think those would be good alternatives because then you can introduce models that would be bad otherwise that are now good because they're good at doing that specific task.
And I'm assuming this is going to happen. They'll have different objectives in, some capacity at some point. The beauty of the, just kill their leader, the game is over, that does make for pretty quick games. Most of my games were 20 minutes at the most, and that's for, the super grind, but most of them were more like 10 minutes, right? Someone got a clear advantage, and bada bing, bada boom, dead. The problem with Kill the Master, it's popped, you win, is it hyper punishes any type of mistake. You make a small error and your opponent can capitalize that, boom, they're massively ahead. Putting in objectives, it allows you to not be perfect or allow for variance where you miss the 97% chance melee attack somehow, or they randomly crit and hit you for 7 instead of the expected 3, or whatever it is. Having a wide scale of objectives mitigates how much you can get instantaneously knocked out of a game. Granted, when the games are really fast, then you just queue up and do it again. It's not like Malifaux if you get screwed and you have to slog for 3 hours.
I don't know. I kind of feel like there were a lot of games in Moonbreaker where one person was clearly dominating, and then there was one big play that swung it the other way. At least put the other person back in a position where they could possibly win it.
But was that play based on a super clever combo from that player? Or is it the person who was winning messed up? Because if it's just a capitalization thing, I think mistakes and errors get super magnified in a just kill the thing to win game style.
I think they both showed up. There were times that clever plays were made by both myself and by opponents that I think put the other person in the game. And there were several times I made just enough stupid mistakes where my opponent was able to capitalize on those. That was probably more common, but that's because learning the game, sometimes you don't expect things to work the way you think they should, and then you do it and you're just like, crap, that may cost me the game. But I mean, that's like Malifaux too. I mean, when you're playing with new stuff at least. So I feel like we need to talk a little bit about some of these things and some of our experiences. And this is more for the people that did play, like what we noticed that we would like to see at least addressed. Goodman, let's start with you. What's something that felt like it could be tweaked?
I think the most striking thing for me is that they start you out with the starter crew, and that happens to be the leader that is incidentally on the largest base. Unfortunately, it seems like they didn't necessarily test out all of their maps very thoroughly. One map specifically, where there were just some gaps where it seemed like he should have fit, or he did not. And given how challenging it is to position as a melee character anyway, that just felt really bad. So those are just some of the rough edges that you kind of expect. Other than that, there seemed to be focus on ramp being better than other things, but who knows how much better.
Mm-hmm. And everything is to be taken with a grain of salt just because, like, you need, in some cases, lots and lots of games to get a true feel of, like, is this OP or is this just, like, a knee-jerk thing?
I will say the only matchup I had against her, I was playing the melee guy, and I just rushed her faster than she thought I would, and she died. So, new players will lose to things.
Mm-hmm. So, Brien, what is something that you would like to see tweaked?
So there's this ship assist mechanic. So kind of in the narrative of the game, you're a ship captain who has the crew and you're like teleported down to the planet and your ship is overhead and can provide support for you. So at the beginning of the game shuffles through, it's like 10, I think, give or take, abilities and randomly packages 2 of them together, presents 3 options to you, and then you pick one of the packages. And those are your 2 ship assist abilities for the game. Those abilities, they have a cooldown cost ranging from 1, so you can use it every turn, to the most expensive, which I think is once every 5 turns.
I think it's 4.
A lot. It's a very slow ramp. And the higher cost ones felt much more situational, and the cheaper ones just felt like always useful. In my mind, reworking how those interact probably should get addressed. Like the super frequent ones, like Plank, you just always do a damage. Really, really strong, and you get to do it every turn, and then you can combo with the other ones. But it's random if you get it, and often you get one opponent who gets that ability and the other didn't. And in most of my games, I was finding the player that got the starting combo of these random ship assists, that was just like the key factor to turn everything on, and they would sweep. Re-looking at how those interact and how the packages get made.
Yeah, and that's going to go along with the whole balancing. I think the easiest way to do this, to make it fair on both sides without having to like really, really hardcore balance, is just make all 3 options the same for both players. So both players have those 3 options.
Yeah.
I would also recommend like figure out which abilities are the strong ones and which ones are the weak ones based on like win rates, and then break them apart so you never get those paired together. So you always get one of the weaker ones and one of the stronger ones. And some of them are very clearly weaker. They're good, but they're more situational, like the gravity pull ones and then the speed one. Those are good, but they're not always going to be useful. Whereas like Plink, you're always going to use. There's a couple of them that you just always use. So I think that's something that could definitely be addressed. But again, that's more balancing issues. Another one that I saw brought up a lot by several players is the timer and how short it is.
Oh, God, yeah.
This is maybe a bit controversial. I like it being really fast because I think it encourages players to play quickly and make mistakes.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a learning thing. Once I knew vaguely what things were, shorter times were just better.
Yeah, and I think it's good, like, do AI games that don't have timers so people can learn how to play the game, and then when you actually do, like, competitive play, turn the timers on.
I think a short timer is fine. Like, I like that because it makes you figure out what your key decision points are, do those first. Like, my original gaming background is from chess, so I did a lot of blitz. You don't have a lot of time. You gotta figure out the optimal line and just gotta go for it. And the short clock forces you to do that. The big complaint and the valid complaint in my mind is it doesn't show you the timer. So you don't actually know how much time you have until the death clock marker, whatever you would call it, shows up on the screen.
And boy, that death clock is fast.
You have time to click like one model to do an attack and YOLO and you're done. So the short timer is fine if I, as a player, know what that time means. Like the timer in the corner of you have 60 seconds and then it ticks down. Like that's really important to give a contextual basis for how much time I have to make my decisions.
Also, it doesn't pause during animations, and animations are kind of long. Losing a bunch of activations or actions just because you were watching animations feels bad.
You can queue up actions, but you have to exactly know where all your models are, because if the animation covers up the models you're trying to click on, then it gets really hard, especially once you hit your death clock and then you're spiraling out of control. That's the most like quality of life change I think they need to do. Balancing is obviously quality of life, but
that comes with playtesting.
Exactly.
I think there's one other thing I would like to see, and this is more if you ever played Blood Bowl, they have this option. There needs to be a key where you like hold it down and it shows you like movement auras and things like that. So then you can move to be like exactly out of their melee range so they can't get to you kind of thing. You can hover over another model to see their movement range. And so I was utilizing that a lot, but it takes time because you have to click off your thing, click on theirs real quick, kind of eyeball it, and then switch over to yours. And it's like the line was about there. It'd be nice if there was just like I hold down a button, it shows me all that. So then I can just click where I need to go.
And those auras, like depending on how you click on the enemy model, the auras drop.
The number of times I freaking mispositioned my model for Astra's Breach. I'm just like, oh, I'm just out of range. Crap.
Yeah, and I think this is more just like they need to refine the system. A lot of the ranges, like the bubbles, actually extend slightly over what the aura says it is. Because I had a couple times with Astra where, like, based on the bubble, I was outside of my remove summoning sickness ability, but I was able to cast it on the model that was summoned. I was finding the ranges are slightly longer than what they show up on the board as, which is a minor thing, but...
Yeah, but it's annoying, so yeah.
Yeah, I think for a game that has such critical position decisions, it was definitely a little too hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it definitely led to, in my personal experience, some feel-bad moments where you just, like, misposition slightly, like those auras, and you're just like, oh, crap, I'm just out of what I was wanting to do.
Well, and it's something Landon talked about a lot. There effectively is no pre-measuring. When you eyeball that sucker, you gotta make sure you do it right, which comes with time and experience, but that makes for a very steep learning curve. The other one that I think goes hand in hand with that is movement's all or nothing. So I declare my walk, I have out to whatever my movement is, but if I walk 2/3 of my move, that's all I move and I'm locked in. And then if I check my attack, I'm slightly out of range. I don't get to roll it back or, take the extra third of the move that I gave up because it's gone. And that is, again, very punishing. So then you're forced to overextend, which means you're exposing yourself to damage.
Yeah, and that's something that could be addressed, I think, without too much difficulty, like I said, by like just cleaner lines. I know some people talked about even doing an undo button. Since everything is on your own turn, I would be okay with like you move something and then you can bounce it back as long as you don't do anything else. My only stipulation with that be the clock can't change then. It has to be one of those, if you're undoing, it's still burning all your time. So you're wasting time sitting there fussing.
Right, it would have to.
Yeah, I think short timer prevents the abuse that you could get with that.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, I think most of the other kind of issues we had seem to be predominantly... Some of it's just quality of life. I would love to see like a tournament mode. Currently, the public and private game system works perfectly fine. We even played in a tournament. The first day, some random people were like, hey, we're going to do a tournament. Who wants to play? And that was before we kind of knew what we were doing. So that was kind of painful. I had one good game and then I got curb stomped. But, that's kind of comes with the game when you're learning and trying to figure out what's good and what's not good. Obviously, spectator mode would be awesome. That's how you get into esports, because if you get like tournament play and you can spectate, that's where you get a lot of viewership. I think that'd be awesome, of course, and like records. Although in this day and age, recording your game you don't necessarily need the game to do that, because it's pretty easy to do with like OBS or something like that. Otherwise, though, it's just like balance changes. I mean, currently the meta is the Astra dominance meta, because the captain is just redonkulously strong. She got all the good abilities. Zax, I think he feels like where everybody should be. And then Extelier he's got melee problems.
Yeah, well, melee in general, when it's slow, just feels inefficient in this, unless your opponent is not experienced in the game, it felt like. But that's just a balancing kick. I'm imagining that gets addressed.
Yeah, I think that's pretty easy. I think it would be fitting if he could walk through models. I think that would fix a lot of his issues too, where he could just maybe even train. And it could be one of those, like, you have to pay one cost and then you can move through things. I know you mentioned it, Brien, to see a little more between captains. I think MOBA games have taught us that like 4 abilities seems to be the perfect balance of like number of abilities that are good, that are unique. So give everybody basically 4 abilities that are kind of unique to them, besides, just melee or just shooting. And then that gives you a good spread of variance within each one, and gives you a lot of flexibility to make new captains, because you can really mix and match things at that point. I think all of them are close. They're just missing something. They need like one more thing, and then of course some tuning. It's like some of the abilities are obviously a little good, some of them are a little weak, but hopefully that'll get addressed. Zeepu's stupid, but that's another story.
Wait, you don't want to just infinite combo and auto win games? That's weird.
I mean, it was fun the couple of times I got the combo working. It's not even that hard to get working, honestly. For those that don't know what it is, essentially you take Astra, you just take the Nekahula, whatever, the guy that can yank things to the bridge and full heal them. You just get him down. You get your beater of choice to 0 mana, because of she has a ramp ability that reduces their cost, and it's permanent. So you reduce their cost to like 0. It goes, punches something, you evac it back up to the bridge, you resummon it, you unstun it, remove the summoning sickness, if you will, and then you go again with it. And it's really broken with like Tipu, because every time he attacks, he gets +1 health and +1 damage. And then you effectively take him off the table so they can't attack him back. And he just gets insane stats where he's just like one-shotting everything off the table.
Well, that's why you just kill him. It's easy for him.
It's easy when you just keep taking him off the table.
So basically, as we've relearned many times, charge and/or haste is good.
Yes, exactly.
It also works with turrets. AoE him, pick it back up, redrop it, AoE him. Now, that one's a lot more expensive to do, but man, it can rip through lots of models really fast if you need to.
I assume that the turret is what that was designed for, is being able to reposition those.
Oh, I mean, that could be what the support unit's supposed to be, yeah. Anyways, any final thoughts? Brien, start with you.
We didn't even talk about, there is a roguelite function within it as well.
Nobody cares about the roguelite stuff.
I like roguelites, damn it. So that's also part of it if you just want to do that. It feels like it has a ton of potential. And for people, I think, who just like minis games, and this lets you play regardless of not having your local game store buddies or whatever. You can just play the computer or jump online and play people. My biggest complaint with Malifaux is it's hard to get a game that's convenient to play because of the time, and, you have to meet up with someone in some capacity to play. And this has a lot of the things I like about my tabletop miniatures game, with then the convenience factor of there's a engine running it for me, so I can just sit down and play, and I don't need to worry about logistics.
Yeah, the convenience of even in a 30-minute lunch, I can get a game in. Like Malifaux, by the time you set everything up, it'd be oh, well, we're done.
Exactly.
Definitely a huge boon.
Yeah, it's a fun game. You should try it.
Definitely. So hopefully we will see you there. I'll be under the name Coyote. I'm going to be putting a lot of content on the YouTube channel. Obviously, if you're watching the YouTube, of course, you know that, as you can see the videos I put up. So look forward to more content, probably a lot more content, because I'm enjoying this game right now. So until next time, get those games in, check this game out as well.